Thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to welcome you. If I can have, who's going to change the slide for me in the back? Is that Tran? Okay, if you can change the slide for me, please. So I just wanted to introduce myself. Most of you know me. I'm the clerk of the council. My name is Daisy Gomez, and this is Norma Miter here. She's the assistant. And then we have Dora in the back, and we have also Tran. We have our two translators, Spanish and Vietnamese. That's Long and also Cesar. And then outside I have Linda. And I wanted to make sure you knew that, so that way if you have any questions, feel free to ask any one of us. I also have virtually joining us is Sophia. She's with Redistricting Partners. She's the consultant who we hired to help us with the demography process. And then I do have Councilmember Lopez here who has joined us. I'm just going to go over really quickly a few housekeeping rules and ask if you want to come and say a few words just to welcome everyone. So wanted to make sure that you knew that if you haven't had an opportunity to sign in, that you do that. And that's for us to see if we have any questions on anything that you've submitted in any of your public comment, testimony, or your map. We wanted to also make sure that you help yourself to the printout, the worksheets, and that includes the community mapping tool. So kind of just to go over what we are providing here. The first page here is just a flyer of all of our community workshops and the dates. We've already had one at Del High. And then just if you want to participate by way of Zoom, you may do that, or you can encourage any member of the public who hasn't been able to join us physically, they can join us virtually. That information is also there. They could do it by Zoom or conference call. We also have the PowerPoint presentation that we're going to be going over today. So the full packet is there. We have our frequently asked questions. We just put this together for you to make sure that you didn't have to look for this information, but everything we have here is also available online. We have what we call a public comment form on community of interest, and we'll go over what a community of interest is. And then the community of interest mapping activity. So we're giving you a couple options of how you want, however you want to describe your community. You could either do it by way of a survey, which is the public comment form, or you can complete a community of interest mapping activity. So essentially you're drawing on this map what you feel is part of your community. And then we ask for the information at the bottom so that way we can help identify who we give credit to if we end up selecting your map. And so I also wanted to make sure you knew that you can help yourself in the back for with any snacks, water, coffee, tea. And then just wanted to make sure that you knew that if there were any questions that you had at all, that you can go ahead and ask us. And if we don't have an answer for you, we will get back to you. Next slide, please. So this is currently the City of Santa Ana ward map that was adopted in 2018. When this map was drawn, it was based on the 2010 census data. Now we're having to go through a redistricting process that's based on the 2020 census data. And we need to take into account the population changes and the interest group. Under California Fair Maps Act, which is also AB 849, the cities and counties are required to have a more robust outreach process with a focus on community interest groups. The redistricting process is and will be very different from the previous redistricting processes because now we're operating under a new law. Next slide, please. So in this agenda, I just wanted to kind of go over quickly what we're going to be covering. The redistricting basics, traditional redistricting principles, and we're only going to cover a brief summary during today's presentation. Communities of interest and what that means. And then towards the end of the presentation, we will have a mapping tool demonstration who will be conducted by Sophia with Redistricting Partners. And then we're also going to cover a few ways for you to provide public testimony, or what we call public comments on the community of interest. And lastly, we're going to go over the public hearing schedule as there have been revisions. or there may be some revisions. Next slide, please. So we're going to cover what is redistricting. So redistricting is a process of adjusting the ward lines, which happens every 10 years after the release of the US Census data. Normally, the data of the census year is released in late March of the following year. However, due to the pandemic and the attempt to insert citizenship questions on the census form, the data wasn't released until late August. For the city of Santa Ana, this map, the final map, is due to the registrar office in April 2022. And just so that you know that there are really good examples and well-known examples of redistricting are usually through the congressional and state legislative districts. But local government redistricting are also going to go through the redistricting process. The city of Santa Ana must go through the process as it did in 2018, but it's going to be based on the 2020 census data. To ensure that the city council wards, are also called districts, are rebalanced after the census data. Another thing to keep in mind, beyond creating wards of equal population, redistricting also serves to empower local communities and preserve the voting rights. The purpose of having the redistricting process is about making sure that there's representation and redrawing our ward boundary lines. Next slide, please. Hi, thank you for joining us. The goals of our community workshops are to do the following three things. One is to conduct the community workshop hearing so that the public can provide input to help identify the communities of interest from the public input, and that the information will be presented with a recommended map or maps to the city council. Next slide, please. Traditional redistricting principles. These are the principles that the council will have to consider when drafting and finalizing their final map. These are also a number of criteria that have been used nationally and upheld by courts. The first one is creating wards of relatively equal size. When we're talking about this, we are talking about the people, not citizens, using the census data. Contiguous means that the wards cannot hop or jump an area or neighborhood. We are going to ensure that all of our wards are in touch with one another. They're intact. Maintaining communities of interest is a concept that we will go more in depth during this presentation. And this is crucial criteria due to the Fair Maps Act. The wards should be in touch. They should be contiguous. They must be, because contiguous means that they cannot hop, or jump. Correct. So another thing that the council can look at is following other local government lines, such as school district boundaries or recreation areas, or other lines that exist that the community would like to uplift. The council can consider that while drafting the map. The last criteria is keeping the district compact. It can appear compact or functionally compacted. The compactness definition in California is to not bypass nearby or faraway population, looking at areas around the wards you're creating and not try to move your lines to grab faraway population. Another thing to consider is if a ward has an odd shape outline, it doesn't mean that it has been gerrymandered. It could also mean that the council wants to maintain a specific community and neighborhood in one area. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. Traditional redistricting principles. So in this particular slide, it's highlighted in red what we're going to be focusing on in this section, and the emphasis is covering the communities of interest. Next slide, please. Bringing like people together for representation. So communities of interest is about reminding ourselves that residents of the city of Santa Ana are the experts of the community. The residents are the ones that are aware of how to functionally navigate around the city. So the term community of interest is about bringing like-minded people together for representation. It is also the building block of wards. It's a high criteria for the redistricting process. Some community of interest include ethnic and language minorities and other groups. Something to remember during these redistricting workshops and process is that just because we're discussing about how people navigate through the city of Santa Ana, we want to remind our residents that communities are subjective and we want people to remain open-ended to be inclusive as much as possible. Some of the communities that are covered by the Voting Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act are Latinos, Asians, and African Americans. Next slide, please. On this slide, what is extremely important to remember is that while communities of interest may include race, it cannot be the major factor in drawing ward boundaries. Next slide, please. Listed here are all the different community of interest items. So it's really just to help you think about what we're looking for when you're submitting a draft map or your testimony, also considered or also called comment, describing your community. So we provided different areas that you can think about. So historical communities, there's economic interest, racial composition, and there's many more listed outside of these. But this is just to give you an idea of what you can think of. There's a wide variety. Next slide, please. Now let's discuss what's not a community of interest. There are major topics, and that is the political party affiliation. That's an example of individuals who give testimony solely based on their political party affiliation. So indicating that they're Republicans, Democrats, Green Party, Independent, etc. The council is not allowed to use that testimony as consideration when you're speaking about a community of interest input. Incumbents is another one, which are similarly to political party affiliation. And then there are political candidates. For example, a testimony that says, I live in this area and I really want the wards to remain the same because I plan to run for council. That's not a testimony that the city council can use as a consideration in the community of interest input. We recognize that it is the right of the members of the public to come and share your testimony, but it is up to the council to determine what things are allowable in order for them to do their redistricting process for their wards without violating the Fair Map Act. In addition to that, it is difficult to consider groups of similarly minded people who do not share a similar geographic location or are citywide. Next slide, please. Members of the public are always welcome to come forward and share their testimony, but it is the job of the city council to determine what they can or cannot use. There are 3 questions that will help members of the public think through what the testimonies mean for the redistricting process. And the first is, does your community have a shared culture, characteristic, or bond? A lot of us think of ourselves as being part of an ethnic group, but beyond being Latino or Asian, what are other characteristics that tie our community together? Do we shop at the similar place, go to a specific park, go to church together? The second question is the community geographic in nature? Is the community able to be mapped? Visual maps are most preferred as we are unable to visualize written or verbal testimonies without a visualized map or geography. We recommend that you include street boundaries, neighborhood names, or specific location in such so that we do not want to misinterpret your preferred map or boundaries. The third question in the testimony consideration is, describe your community's relationship with the jurisdiction and how it is affected by the policy decisions made by elected officials. And what this means is to consider what your community's relationship with the city of the Santa Ana City Council. What are the regulations, the laws that affect your community? These 3 things will help you evaluate and determine your testimony or your public comment. Next slide, please. So what we did was we went ahead and developed a few questions to help you determine whether or not you think this is a community of interest. I'm going to ask a question to the group and nod if you think this is a community of interest. A group of renters who live downtown testify to the city council. Do you think this would be considered a community of interest? Great. That is correct. Next slide, please. If the public members in the audience nodded or agreed to the statement, you are correct, as this group of residents can easily be mapped in a district area, and they share a common policy interest, which can be addressed through the legislation or public services. Next slide, please. Is this considered a community interest? A part of town that has a historic nature, either as a former hub of business, community, or as an area that has been discriminated against through redlining or racially restrictive covenants. Should the city council prioritize these historical areas when drawing a map? Next slide, please. That is correct. If the public members in the audience nodded or agreed to the statement, you are correct in assuming that the historical communities or other groups mentioned can be considered a community of interest. Next slide, please. In this example, a group of dog owners living in the suburb banded together to push their local elected officials to put in a dog water fountain in their dog park. Would the city council consider this a community of interest? Next slide, please. Yes, in this instance, it can be considered a community of interest. They share the same geographic location as well as having the same needs for a public facility to be added. This would be handled by the city along with any other additions to public park facilities. Next slide, please. A statewide group or people who are fans of San Francisco Giants testify to the city council. Is this considered a community of interest? Great, next slide, please. Exactly, no. It's important for you to realize that we would say no simply because these fans are spread across multiple cities and cannot be distinctly drawn on a map. If we could think about this example in another way, we could imagine a baseball league specific to Santa Ana. That could be considered a community of interest only if it applied to our city. Next slide, please. So that was fun, and I hope you found this activity helpful for you to help identify what your community of interest groups are. There are many ways to submit your interest form today. If you're present and you'd like to fill out an interest form while you're here or submit a comment, as well as fill it out, you can also fill it out online and submit it directly on our website. Next slide, please. We also provided map submission. There are two types of expected input. You can also submit a personalized map. There are two kinds. There is the community of interest map and district or ward plan maps. Community of interest maps can outline your specific community or neighborhood or any area you think should be kept whole. The district or ward map can be drawn based off of the upcoming 2020 census data, which outlines the entire city. These maps can either be full or partial and may be submitted online as well. Next slide, please. And there's another option where you can actually draw your own line, and that is the link. It's https://districtr.org or districtr/tag/Santa-Ana or _Ana. This is the link where you can utilize the drawing tools where you can test out and draw your own map. And you could also visit our website. Next slide, please. So there are also physical paper copies of the map so that you can hand draw and play around with certain lines and boundaries. After, you can submit your paper maps to staff, and then we will make sure that it's posted on the website to be considered as part of the redistricting boundary redrawing. Next slide, please. Oh, and then this is an example of the type of questions you will be reading on your online community mapping tool, which we also provided in paper copy. If you do decide to complete one today and want to keep your map, Please allow me or a staff member to take a picture of your map before you leave so we can have our consultant review what you're considering as part of your community. If you don't know your current community area, please identify the geographic street boundaries. The more details you provide, the more accurate the findings can be. Next slide, please. This is our plan schedule for our community workshop meetings, and we have a variation of evening and morning meetings to accommodate as many busy schedules as we can. The locations vary throughout the city to accommodate all current wards and different communities. We, as a city, are committed to having a transparent and accessible redistricting process. And we hope that if you have any questions or comments, that you can talk to me or any one of my staff members or consultants from redistricting partners. It would be a great appreciation if you could tell your community members, your friends, about the workshop so we can have as many people participate as possible. Each meeting will be asking for the same information, so you don't need to attend additional meetings. Note that we are going to go to your neighborhood, one per ward. However, should you feel a need for me to reach out to a particular community, I ask you to please provide me that information and I'm more than happy to participate. Next slide, please. This is a list of public hearings that the council adopted. On the October 5th meeting, the council adjourned the October 5th meeting, so the first public hearing, to October 19th. So on October 19th will be our first public hearing. I have listed in red and italics those other meetings because I will be presenting to council on October 19th a set of other public hearing dates to see if they would accommodate. So that way we don't have very long council meetings. The city council have had pertinent time-sensitive council action items, and so it may impact these dates. Again, you can listen or participate in the council meetings, but if you've already provided your input, then it's already captured. You do not have to repeat your input. Next slide, please. We are also offering at every one of the workshops and council meetings virtual participation. So if you're not able to come in person, you can go and participate as scheduled by Zoom, or you can call in and enter that meeting ID number. And everything is being recorded and will be posted on our website. Next slide, please. And the website that I keep referencing is www.santa-ana.org/redistricting. Any and all information regarding redistricting will be stored on the record for 10 years. So if there are any inquiries in the future, city staff will maintain the records for a decade. This is also to help in any future redistricting inquiries and could be used as a reference for the 2031 redistricting process. And with that, does anybody have any questions? Oh, I'm sorry. We want to record your question. Yeah.
Would you know if Ward 3 will get larger or smaller in size in this process?
We do not know that. I think what we're looking from you, from every single community member, is to help draw out what you feel is part of Ward 3. And then when you tell us what you think it is, we want to make it has to be equal with all the other districts, right? So it's about how to move that line. So we won't be able to know that until maybe the third public hearing.
Follow-up, has the population of the city grown?
No, it has reduced. Yeah. But I can't say whether or not that's District 3 or Ward 3. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
By how much has the population reduced?
I am not sure, but I think probably looking at what our demographer has already provided online in that districtor or district R, however you want to pronounce that website, will give you an idea once you start to select areas.
So does that district or website list what the population was total and now what it is total? Does it show the difference?
I don't know, Sophia, can you answer that?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, the districtor website, and I will, I'm going to do a demo in a little bit, but it only shows the 2020 population data. We do have a PDF like report that we created, and I'm not sure, Daisy, if we've sent it to you yet because we haven't done the first presentation to the board, but we did create what we call an existing line memo, which compares the 2010 data to the 2020 data. We do know that you redistricted in a mid-decade year, but any redistricting that happens prior to the release of the 2020 data will be using the 2010 data. So we do have a document that displays that and shows you the difference in the deviation between the districts, but districtor only has the 2020 data because any partial maps that are drawn or full draft maps in order to be considered by the council will need to be using the 2020 data. So I hope that answers your question.
Did you have another question or do you want to go through the districtor? Oh,
The question I have is, if we provide the map for communities of interest, what kind of feedback do we get from the city that the information was received? And yeah, I'll just do the question.
so we don't actually submit anything unless you go on to the actual portal on our website. Then you will get an auto reply, and we do post that on the website. But a way for you to confirm anything you gave us in paper form will be posted on that website, so you can definitely go check to verify that it's on there.
Okay. And the other question that I have,
And you may run across more questions after she goes over the actual redistrictor.
I apologize if you covered this before I came in. Tell me again how the decision-making process goes. When you make a submission, it gets funneled through you. You do an analysis and then make recommendations to the city or the city council?
No, so we actually hired redistricting partners who that is their expertise.
Right.
And so they review what you provide to them. And then they make sure that it is within the Fair Maps Act. So that way we're within the legal boundaries. You're not selecting an area and jumping another area. And then, they make sure that it is contiguous.
But who makes the final decision to accept?
The city council does. However, redistricting partners reviews it and says, this is what your community says. And this is what they present to the council. And it may be more than one map. It could be multiple. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sophia.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in. So it's correct that we will not draw communities of interest testimony that is given verbally or written. However, the verbal and written testimony will be given to the council. The reason why we will not draw any community of interest testimony due to written or verbal testimonies, we don't want to misinterpret something that the member of the public is saying. We will show them all of the maps on Districtor. If you do draw a map on a paper map or even on a napkin or another piece of paper, we will draw that and add that to the software. And all of the community of interest testimony will be submitted to the council for review. And something that we've been seeing in other jurisdictions is that using Districtor a public map that has been submitted can be uplifted. And it's something that the council can direct us to go and make sure that it follows the Fair Maps Act. There's been a couple of maps that are close to not having us do any modification. And any reason why we would modify a map is what Daisy said, to ensure that it's following the Fair Maps Act, the Federal Voting Rights Act, and making sure that it follows those criterias. But yeah, we will uplift all community of interest testimony, and we will get direction from the board on how we will draft maps, or if we will uplift a map from the public. And again, the council has not received any presentation starting the redistricting process at the council level. So we haven't even done the intro presentation yet, but we will do a presentation on process, and that is something that the board will decide. And they are, as Daisy said, the final, they will have the final authority to finalize a map, and their deadline is the end of April.
And what safeguards are in place with council to ensure that they're not acting out of self-interest, but are acting in the best interest of the city?
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Can you repeat that again?
What safeguards are in place to ensure that council members act in the best interest of the city and rather out of self-interest and self-preservation?
So there is that Fair Maps Act, which Daisy referenced in the presentation. It is, if you'd like to look it up on the state site, the bill number is AB 849. So it is a new law that was passed in 2019. And it is a law that as cities and counties across the state must follow. And it really has changed the redistricting process for cities and counties across the state, because it has a really high priority for transparency, for requiring more outreach, more accessibility. The slide that Daisy talked about of the 3 communities of interest pieces that the board is prohibited from being considered as testimony, again, our incumbency, political candidates, or any partisanship. And so we at Redistricting Partners have asked the council and staff to not share the addresses of council with us. So we will be drawing all maps based on testimony and based on any direction we receive from the board. So that is a law that is really something that was passed and uplifted by community organizations across the state. They had a really big push and effort. Another piece of that is that all redistricting content must be time certain. So if you were at the board meeting earlier this week and the board did stop their discussion and started the redistricting content at 7, they did decide to move that date again, as Daisy said at that end of the presentation. But there's a lot of content in there that is helping the board kind of have a more open process. But a great way to also ensure that is your comment, is for you to come to these meetings, for you and other members of the public to give testimony, so that they will have communities of interest testimony to look at, and that can help guide the process. So there's the law, but also I've been to some of your meetings, and I know how publicly engaged your residents are. So getting the word out and attending these meetings is a wonderful way to be a part of the process. And you're welcome to give testimony at these outreach meetings, but also at public meetings themselves.
What does the verb uplift mean? You keep on using that verb. I have no idea what you mean.
Excuse me?
Uplift. What does it mean?
Oh, so uplift, the way that we use it is when I say that the council would uplift a map that could potentially be on Districtor, that they bring it to light, that they put it at the forefront of what we're talking about, to maybe if we get 50 maps, that they choose one or a handful of them to highlight and to talk about. So that's what I mean when I use uplift. Does that make sense?
Kind of.
Okay.
Essentially, it means to not neglect. right? It's to make sure that you're identifying, let's say, a particular area that needs to be kept together. And I don't know if you have a really good example. That might be the best way of helping define uplift. Sophia, do you? And
An example could be for the city of LA. They've had over 350 submissions on their districtor site, and we still have them rolling in. And the independent commission there has this, when they began looking at their map drawing process, they highlighted about 4 to 5 maps that were drawn by the public. And so they took, in the 350 submissions, they chose to look closer at and evaluate closely about 5 maps. And so that's a really good example of uplifting a map that was submitted by the public and something that is no longer just on their districtor site, but is now more prominent and actually being discussed in public forum.
And so what they used to help create or select those 5 out of all the 300 plus that was submitted was what? Was it based on?
That's a wonderful question. So what LA decided to do was they had the commissioners go and review all the testimony. They also had a lot of robust testimony during their process, and they highlighted some key principles, some key themes that they heard during the testimony, and also themes that they've heard just as being a community member and a commissioner. And so they listed all of those principles out, and then we went through and looked for publicly submitted maps that had as many of those themes that the commission brought to light. And so that's something that we could do in the city of Santa Ana as well. If the council has a couple of themes or some communities of interest that they would really like us to focus on, we can go back, look at the publicly submitted maps and try to highlight or note any of the submissions that have those communities of interest outlined. So that's what they decided to do. That we've seen it done.
Neighborhoods, right? It could be historical neighborhoods. Maybe they all want to be, they're closely together. Maybe they all want to be joined into one ward or one group. So that could be a community of interest.
Right, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I remembered my questions here. A couple of them. In the 2018 redistricting process, there were 3 variations of the 6 ward boundaries. And that was presented to City Council. And we came out with a 4th version through the City Council process. They essentially redrew the boundaries at City Council meetings. So is that something that this state law is going to prohibit? Do they have to accept your boundary lines, or do they have the flexibility to readjust the boundary lines based upon their desires? The other part is, when will these drafts be presented to the public to start reviewing and commenting on? I know we have time to review things, and everything has to be done by, I think, was April, was it? And so the sooner that we can start looking at the drafts, the better. And so those are my 2 comments. Thank you.
Those are really great questions, and those they kind of go hand in hand. Under the Fair Maps Act, the council must have any draft map that will be discussed in a public forum, and especially the final map that they're adopting, be online and be made public for 7 days. So we are going to work with staff to ensure that maps that are discussed in a public forum will be on the website a week prior to allow for the public to make comments. The council does have the authority to direct us to make changes to those drafts, but again, any changes that they make will need to be then posted for 7 days. So they will not be able to ask us to make major changes during a council meeting, and then they are not allowed to adopt that map in the same meeting if they have made major changes. So there is that piece of the law in there to allow for public comment.
And so what's important is that if, let's say the council does change the line and the community doesn't agree with that, I think it's just, you have to speak up and say, there's a community of interest group that should be kept together and that needs to be considered. I think that's where it becomes very important.
And to your, oh, sorry, Daisy.
No, I was going to ask, would that be correct, Sophia? That is-
Yes, yeah, definitely.
yes.
And to your question of when will draft maps be made public, again, we haven't really started the process for the council itself. And so I believe they will have that discussion at the next council meeting on the 19th.
Yes.
Under the Fair Maps Act as well, the council has to have a minimum of 4 hearings where they have hearings for before they discuss draft maps, and then hearings once maps are made public, and then a final hearing. But again, they oftentimes, if there is any discussion to changes of draft maps, then they will be required to have another hearing. So often we see councils or districts have 5 hearings, but the minimum requirement is 4.
And I believe the first 2 are pre-draft maps, and then the last 2 public hearings are going to be draft maps.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So the first 2 hearings on the 19th, pending right now any change or any or adjusting of the timeline. Again, we will be giving what we call a redistricting 101 presentation, which will be about a 30 to 45 minute presentation where we will go in depth on the process, on the criteria, and have it be a just introduction for the council and the public so that we all are on the same footing of understanding for your redistricting process. And again, also the new criteria under the Fair Maps Act. So we'll give that presentation twice before we discuss any draft maps. And then after that, we'll go into the draft map discussion.
So did you have another question?
Yes. Did you say that we have 7 days once the council comes up with a draft map?
When any map that will be discussed during a public city council meeting will need to be posted for 7 days. So that's the timeline that we'll be operating in. Again, I don't know the exact date yet on when we will have draft maps available to the public, but any maps that will be discussed in a public forum will need to be posted a week prior. And again, they should be accessible on the website. All of the redistricting content, videos, meeting minutes, presentations will be on that website, which the staff is required to maintain for a decade, just as Daisy said.
That's not quite what I was trying to get at. Once a map is put forth by the city council and it's a change to the maps that were input by the interest groups, how long does the public have to comment on the new map that was created by the city council before the council can vote to make that the real map?
A minimum of 7 days.
That seems pretty short.
But yes, but we won't do that to you. We're going to definitely give you 2 weeks because we have council meetings, right? And that is the focus, is to make sure that we want to give it, well, let's see, there's the 1st and 3rd Tuesday of every month, we have a council meeting. So we won't, if we have any public hearings scheduled, we would keep it in that same time frame where we would have it, let's say maybe on the Monday before the council meeting, and then the next public hearing would be the following Monday before the council meeting. So we would try to keep it as the 2 weeks. we don't want to do the 7-day. That's just a minimum.
Yeah, and that's there because prior to the Fair Maps Act, there wasn't a requirement to have any maps posted prior to the Fair Maps Act. So in 2011 or anything before 2019, a council or a board of supervisors could make changes to a map and adopt that same map during the same meeting. And so before there was no requirement. And so now there is a minimum of 7, but the public and the council, whoever's in charge, can definitely extend that deadline longer if they would wish, which we hear Daisy saying that this city would like to do 2 weeks. So that I just would like to give you some background on what we had before, but absolutely the public can and ask for an extended period of time to discuss the maps.
Not to beat it to death, but 2 weeks is still pretty short when you consider federal rule making.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. So if someone could repeat the question.
Wouldn't seem to me to be an unreasonable amount to get members of your interest group organized and make new maps and make counter proposals.
Right, and so what we're looking for is to make sure we get as many community members involved on the preset before that draft map even gets there. And then you've got your first, so it would be the 3rd public hearing where community members can start seeing that first draft map and start putting in that input. That is vital because now we have to consider that because you just identified a community of interest group. So the earlier you provide that information, the more of an opportunity you're giving the council something to consider. If you wait until they're ready to finally adopt the map, it gets quite close to the deadline. However, another thing to keep in mind, as we said earlier, is that the map is due to the registrar of voters by April 2022. So that doesn't mean we want to wait that long because we want to make sure that we verify information and look at the boundaries and make sure that everything, we crossed our T's and dotted our I's and did the best we could. So before we submit that. And we want to review what we gave the county and there's a lot of back and forth. Did you want to go, Sophia, through you can share the screen. I think Norma gave you access to.
Yes, yeah, let me do that.
The fun map, I got to play with the tool, the Districtor tool, and I thought it was, I didn't submit a map, but, but I did get to play with the tool.
Oh, great. I'm gonna share, yes, continue. Here, okay. Are you able to see my screen? I can make it a little bit bigger. Yes, okay. So this is
Your screen, yes.
Oh, you can't?
Maybe if there we go. Now we can see it.
Okay, there's just a little lag. Okay, wonderful. So this is your Districtor link for the city of Santa Ana. Districtor is a mapping tool that was created out of Tufts University, and it is one of the mapping tools that is being used across the state by multiple jurisdictions and across the country. It is a very user-friendly and intuitive tool. And because of that, it's very important that if you would like to submit communities of interest maps or draft maps or partial district plans, that you use this specific link. There are other links where you can submit to other cities, other counties, or statewide. But if you're interested in submitting to the city of Santa Ana, please use this link, and you can find it in the presentation and also on the website. And so it's districtor.org/event/Santa_Ana. There's a couple of sections of note for your homepage. There's some background information on the redistricting process. You have the section to start drawing your maps. And as Daisy noted, There are two types of map submissions that you can submit to your council, which are communities of interest maps, and then you can also submit ward council maps. They have it here as districts, but we know it's wards. You have a gallery where any maps that are submitted will be made available to the public. So any maps that are submitted using Districtor, we will count as official public testimony, and all of the maps will then be, we will look at the data, analyze it, and then also upload that to the Santa Ana Redistricting website. You also have a section for draft maps. So if you are not ready to submit your final map, you can submit it as a draft map. And the final section is a little bit more about the census data and our firm Redistricting Partners. So I'm going to review both of the types of maps that you can submit. I'll show you they're pretty similar, but there are some pieces that are different. So I'll note that. So I'll start with the communities of interest, and it's the orangey red button, and it's named Santa Ana, identify a community built out of block groups. So it's here. Okay. Oh, you have wonderful. So it's a little hard to see, but you can see, I'll zoom out a little bit more, the boundary of the city of Santa Ana. You may also be asking, why is the city broken up into those kind of smaller square, like gray geographies? Those are the census blocks. So when Daisy went over the traditional redistricting criteria, and she went over the first one to create wards of relatively equal size out of census data. When we talk about census data, we're not only talking about that number of total population, but we're also talking about the geography. So we received the census data, and the smallest unit of geography that we receive it is a census block. And so that is the unit of geography that we see here in Districtor, and it will be the base geography that we use when we're creating districts. We know a lot of members of the public, specifically in California. If you were a part of the 2020 census outreach, you may be really familiar with Census Tracts. So for the hierarchy, just for some census geography, there's the census block, then it goes block group, and then it goes census tract. So census tract is the larger geography for the census data. On the left-hand side, you can zoom in and zoom out of your map. You can also orient your map pointing north if you end up in a different direction. You have a search bar where you can insert a specific location in the city, and it will zoom your map to that location. But the bulk of the use that we see will happen on the right side of the screen. So as soon as you log into your Districtor, you will be automatically clicked on the button, which is the pan tool. It's the tool that lets you move your map around. It's the tool that lets you zoom in and zoom out on your mouse. We have the tool, the drawing paintbrush tool, which allows you to click on your census blocks. And so we'll do that in a little bit. I just want to introduce the rest of the buttons. There's the erase button, which will allow you to erase any census blocks that you don't want to be a part of your communities of interest. And the final button is your inspection tool, which if you hover over a census block will tell you the total population of that census block and the ethnic breakdown. So we're going to go back to the paintbrush. Here you can make your paintbrush small, so you can do 1 by 1, or you can click a larger area by toggling this blue button. So to start drawing a community of interest, you simply start clicking away. So you can either click and move your mouse, or you can click and then hold your mouse down and drag it to get some census blocks. One of the differences between the community of interest Districtor tool and the district drawing tool is in the communities of interest, you can add as many communities of interest as you would like. There's no limit. For the district drawing tool, you will only be able to draw this set number of ward boundaries, which we have there as 6. So here you can draw 7, you can draw 10, or you can draw 1. So that's a difference. Another one is that, oh, I just changed the color, is that you can overlap your communities of interest. So I have this green one, but I can overlap with the yellow, and I can also overlap with this blue area. So there's like a tealy area and a lighter green. You will not be able to overlap your districts using the district drawing tool, but for communities of interest, we understand that specific areas can be a part of multiple communities of interest. And so that's why you're able to overlap. At any portion during at the time when you're drawing a map, you can go and name your specific geographies. So if we go to the select button, we'll see that we have all of the colors that we created, and the generic name right now is Community 1, Community 2, and Community 3. So to rename these, you click on the color, you go to this name area, and you can type in a name, and you can type in a description. So you can describe the area, the geography. You can think back to those 3 questions that Daisy went over during the presentation. This is also a difference as well. When you're drawing the district, the ward boundaries, you will not have an option to describe your map. The best way to kind of comment on a map that you submit is to send in an email or give a public comment, and you can reference your specific map ID. And I will show you what that is and what that looks like when we go back to the homepage. You're also able to create specific locations, or in Districtor, they're called important places. So to do that, you click on this blue button called New Marker, and now you can click a specific location. So it could be if you're interested in a specific school, specific park, specific intersection. The difference here is that no matter how many locations you pick, they will all be red dots. So whether you make 1, whether you make 20, they're all going to be red dots. So to reference and name the location, you hover over the dot, and it's new point 1, new point 2, new point 3. So I want to rename new point 1. So it's the same thing that we did earlier. You click on the selection and you can name it. Just for example purposes, I'm not submitting this as testimony. You also have the box to describe your point. Now to delete a point, if you don't want it in there, you figure out which one you want to delete. So I'm going to delete new point 2. I select new point 2, and then I'm going to select this like trash can delete button, and then it'll go away. For your data layers, I'm going to click on the data layers tab. You can decide to show numbers for your communities of interest. For the demographics, we have the total population based on different racial breakdowns. We also have the citizen voting age population, otherwise referred to as CVAP, and this is the data set that we would use if we were creating any Voting Rights Act districts. So you have that breakdown there as well. You can also create a coalition district by clicking on a couple of these different ethnicities, going back to show population, and then clicking on that coalition population, and then that data breakdown will be there. You have the evaluation tab, which will show your specific communities of interest and the breakdown of it by total population. You can also look at CVAP along with the population of the city of Santa Ana. We don't see this tab being used as much in the community of interest tool, specifically because you don't need census data to submit a community of interest. You don't need anything other than what you believe to be your community of interest, what your narrative is. So this is just supplemental information and data. We've also seen in other jurisdictions that we can add other data layers. We've seen school districts added, or school districts is actually the main one, and other city boundaries. So that's something that can be added if we are asked to by the council or by the public. We can work with staff to do that. But right now, we just have the population and the CBAP. So when you want to save and submit your map, the best way to do that is to click the Save button at the top right, and you'll see a new window pop up, and you can share to gallery. And what that means is that your map will then be a part of that homepage, and we already saw that there were 2 maps there. You can go ahead and name your map if you would like. It's not necessary because every map will receive a unique ID. But you can definitely name it if you'd like. You can share it as a work in progress, as a draft by clicking work in progress, and then you'll be able to save it as a draft. Every map, every community of interest map, and every districtor map, district-based map will have a unique ID URL, that is created and a way that you can share. However, again, the best way to share your map to ensure that the council sees it, to ensure that it's made public, is to share it to the gallery. You do have other options to sharing by clicking the top button at the right, by printing it as a PDF, or if you want to look at your shapes in another mapping software, such as an Esri software or a Maptitude software, you can download it as a CSV, GeoJSON, or a shapefile. So I'm going to go back to the home page so that we can see how to draw a district or map. So we have 2 maps in the gallery, and you'll see at the bottom under their name that they chose, there's a specific ID. And so that's what I mean by a unique ID. So every map that is submitted will have a unique ID, and that is the number and the name that we will be using when we are highlighting any maps for the council. So we won't be submitting, or we won't be referencing the name that the public gives it, but the number for consistency's sake. And also because there's not a check on what folks can name them. So we're gonna, for consistency's sake, just reference the number. So we're gonna go now and show you how to draw a ward boundary. And automatically you can see a couple of differences. One of the differences is that this kind of box here that has the line down the middle, and it has this number and the word ideal. So this is the ideal population for each district based on the new 2020 data. So you do have an allowable total plan deviation of 10%. But if you were going to not have any deviation, each district would then, its ideal population would be 51,898.83 people. So we're going to go to the brush tool because we already know the pan tool, and you'll see that you only will be able to draw 6 districts or 6 ward. And so we're going to start. And when you start drawing a district, you'll see that will toggle to the right, and it'll show you and tell you the amount of people that are in your data that you're choosing. Again, this is just for example purposes. I'm not drawing a map to submit. And now we can see how many people we have in the purple district, in the blue district, and we can also see the population deviation. So we're well above the 10% allowable deviation, even with our 3 districts that we made. So I'll just maybe add a little bit more here. Okay. So the data layers is the same as the community of interest map. We have the total population, we have the citizen voting age population, and you're also able to use the coalition builder. The evaluation tool looks a little bit different, and how it looks like is it'll let you compare the different ethnic groups to one another based on the way that you drew your districts. So again, you can look at it by by population. And you can also look at it by CVAP. And again, CVAP is the data layer that we would use if we are asked to draw Voting Rights Act districts. The same function you use to save your map and submit it by clicking the Save button at the top right. Again, you're able to, or it did create a unique URL for your map. And the best way to share your map is to click the green button to share to gallery, or to save it as a draft work in progress. You have the same ability to name it. And again, you can print your map as a PDF, and you can also download it as a GeoJSON shapefile or CSV to look in another mapping software. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, but am available for any questions, or can reshare if folks have questions
Can you give them the microphone still?
on that. Yeah, I can't hear you if you don't go to the mic. So I appreciate that, Daisy. Thank you so much, because you guys have had really wonderful questions this evening. I appreciate them.
Yes, we have someone who has a question.
Okay.
The census blocks, are those tied in with the current precinct boundaries at all, or are they independent for precinct boundaries?
Wonderful question. So the precinct boundaries and census blocks are different. We will be utilizing census blocks as the base geography, because precincts can change throughout the decade. So I'm not sure right now if your current districts line up to the precincts and the census blocks. That's something maybe staff knows, but we won't even look at precincts during this process.
Okay, thank you. The other question that I have,
It's that last Tuesday meeting that got the best of you, Dale.
So Phil, when you're drawing on the second map, I understand the first map has preordained boxes that correspond to the census blocks. And drawing a district map, what are the constrictions? Does it go by block? Does it, can we configure it in any way we want? Or are there some preordained limitations?
Similar, the two maps I showed you are both based on census blocks. So again, the reason why we have it based on census blocks and we can't split them is because that number one criteria of creating districts of relatively equal population based on census data, and we get the smallest unit of geography that we get that census data is at the block level. And so if council or someone asked us to split a census block, we wouldn't know the true number of people that were in a split census block. And so we keep to the that geography. So both are based on census geography. That's a great question.
the second question that I have is, when you go ahead and do the draft maps and you post it in the draft area versus the gallery area, is the draft just visible to the author of that, or is that everybody can see your drafts then?
Yes, they're all made available to the public. We won't know who are the author of the maps unless you put your name on them, again, because there's not a requirement to log in. So Districtor is public. You don't need a login, and anything that's submitted in the gallery or the draft, we will take as a public submission. We've received the question in other jurisdictions if we're allowed to take down a map or to delete a map, and that's not something that we could even do on our end. We would have to talk to Tufts University to take that down. But again, because we are interpreting that as a public space for public comment, we will still need to take all those maps into consideration, and they will be a part of the testimony for the 10 years. So even if one person submits 10 maps, we're going to look at all 10 maps, even if one person submitted them.
So so who is allowed to access the draft? Is it only the originator, the submitter? Because if you're creating a draft and you want to go back into that draft to make additional changes, is it anybody can go into that draft, or only the submitter can go into that draft and make changes?
That's a wonderful question. It's based on your IP address. So if you want to change a map based on a draft, you want to use the same computer that you used. Again, because you don't need to use a login, it remembers your IP address. So it's based on your specific computer.
Thank you.
That's a really great question. Thank you.
And to whom is this tool open to? Meaning, is it just Santa Ana residents, or can anybody make a submission, such as public interest groups, unions, fill in the blank, people who have their own interests that they're trying to protect?
It's available to the public. So again, because we don't require any additional information, anyone who has access to a computer and this link is able to submit a map.
Huh.
Okay, any other questions? And if you come up with any other questions, feel free to, submit that by email, and we will definitely pass that through to redistricting partners to assist us in answering any questions if we can't answer it. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Sophia, for being here as well. Appreciate your time. And appreciate any input you have. This is the time, and I ask you to talk to your neighbors to really submit their interest groups. And the 3 questions I did want to just touch on that one more time to think about is, does your community have a shared culture, characteristic, or bond? Is your community geographic in nature? Is the community able to be mapped? And then describe your community's relationship with the jurisdiction and how it is affected by the policy decisions made by the elected officials. Those are the 3 major things you need to think about. And with that, I will end our meeting. Thank you so much again, Sophia, and thank you for participating.
Thank you. Happy to be here, and thank you all for your questions. We look forward to seeing your maps.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.